I was halfway through mowing my front yard when she strutted up the driveway like she owned the place. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her bleach blonde hair, and a look that said, "You're about to hear me speak whether you want to or not." "Zayden Fletcher," she said, like reading my name off a courtroom charge sheet. "We need to talk about your landscaping non-compliance." I killed the mower and pulled off my gloves. "Good afternoon to you too, Clarabeth Ashburn, HOA board president, self-declared queen of the neighborhood, and the reason I now kept a camera on my front porch." She'd been elected 2 years ago after the previous president moved out. Since then, it was like living under a dictatorship, only with more passive-aggressive emails and surprise fines. "I noticed," she said, flipping through one of the many papers on her clipboard, "that you're not enrolled in our community-approved landscaping service. All residents are required to use Green Crest groundskeeping. It's in our updated guidelines." "Updated without a vote?" I asked. She blinked like I'd spoken Swahili. "The board approved it. That counts." That's not how our CC and Articus work, Clarabeth. You can't just mandate a private service and force us to pay for it." She leaned in like she was about to share a juicy secret. "Zayden, trust me, this is easier for everyone. Green Crest keeps the neighborhood consistent and tidy. You'll be billed starting next week." I stepped back. "No, I won't. It's already added to your HOA dues. You can't make up charges and call it dues." "That's fraud." She huffed and scribbled something down. "Then I'll be issuing a non-compliance fine. We'll see what the board says at the next meeting." I watched her march off, heels clicking like a metronome of petty authority. Green Crest had a reputation. They overcharged, underdelivered, and according to a few neighbors, never even showed up some weeks. And now I was being forced into it. Nope. Not happening. I went straight into my garage, grabbed the binder where I kept every HOA document since I moved in, and flipped through the CC and Articus. Nowhere did it say services could be mandated. It listed optional partnerships and encouraged uniformity, but forcing us to pay for a specific company. Total overreach. The next morning, I walked over to my neighbor, Ron, who was also slapped with the same mandatory service nonsense. We talked at his porch. "She tried to fine me $300, Ron said, shaking his head. "I mow my own lawn, better than those Green Crest guys ever would." I nodded. "We need to push back. She's bluffing." Ron laughed. "You gonna take her down, Zayden?" I smiled. "I'm gonna prove she doesn't have the authority she thinks she does." That night, I pulled security footage, emails, and copies of the HOA bylaws, every detail. If Clarabeth wanted a fight, she picked the wrong lawn. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories by Thursday. I'd already flagged 6 violations in the HOA's latest amendment packet alone. The so-called Green Crest mandate had never been ratified properly. No community vote, no public notice, not even a digital record of board discussion. Just a quietly mailed packet with a glossy brochure and the smug assumption that no one would read the fine print. But I read every line. I spent most of that evening at my dining table surrounded by my laptop, a legal pad, and 3 color-coded highlighters. A cup of cold coffee sat forgotten near the edge as I cross-referenced the HOA's recorded articles with the county's official version online. That's where I spotted something that made me sit bolt upright. The property management company that oversaw our HOA, Elmsworth Residential, had submitted a conflict of interest disclosure 2 years ago. On page 18, buried beneath budget allocations and vendor lists, was a payment made to Green Crest groundskeeping under affiliate contractor services. The amount, $41,000 over 1 fiscal year. And the kicker, the document was signed by Clarabeth Ashburn. She wasn't just mandating Green Crest, she was profiting from them. The next morning, I called in a favor. "Zayden Fletcher, haven't heard from you since the city council hearing on the Eastwood rezoning," came the warm voice of my friend, Priya Desai. She was a municipal lawyer I'd met during a zoning dispute last year when the city tried to approve a high-rise next to a heritage site. I helped her with public records. She helped me understand legalese. You still good with HOA law? I asked. Depends. Am I going to enjoy this? I gave her the short version: green crest, the forced fees, the undisclosed financial relationship. There was a pause before she said, "Send me everything. Documents, timestamps, emails, any recordings you have. If this is what you say it is, someone's committed ethics violations and possibly fraud." I spent the next 2 hours putting together a digital packet, complete with annotated PDFs, a copy of the HOA bylaws, and the security footage from my porch showing Clarabeth making her little "you'll be billed" declaration. By the time I clicked send, Ron had texted to say that 3 more homeowners had received similar notices. One of them was an elderly woman named Mrs. Delaney who'd lived here for 24 years. She was retired and on a fixed income. Her fine for not complying had ballooned to over $600. I knocked on her door just after lunch. She opened it with a slow, cautious expression until she saw my face. "Oh, the nice man with the golden retriever," she said, smiling faintly. "Is everything all right? I heard about what they sent you," I said. "I'm working on getting it reversed, but I need your permission to include your fine in the formal complaint." Her eyes widened. "Complaint? I'm filing it with the city. Clarabeth isn't just breaking HOA rules." "She might be breaking the law." She hesitated, looking unsure. "I'll handle the paperwork," I added gently. "Just need your signature." Mrs. Delaney gave a firm nod. "All right." "Do it." By sunset, I had 6 affidavits, 4 signed statements, and 1 very irritated email from Clarabeth demanding I cease spreading misinformation that undermines community cohesion. I printed it and added it to the folder titled Retaliation. Saturday was the monthly HOA meeting. Normally, they held it in the rec center lounge, but this time they moved it to the elementary school cafeteria to accommodate larger attendance. That was code for damage control. Word had spread. People were angry. I arrived early, sat in the second row, and waited. Clarabeth entered 10 minutes late, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She wore a blue pantsuit and the tight smile of someone trying to control a narrative before it collapsed. "We'll begin shortly," she announced, shuffling papers and adjusting the mic. The moment she opened the floor for questions, I stood. "Zayden Fletcher, Lot 28, I said clearly. "I'd like to request the immediate suspension of the Green Crest mandate based on improper ratification and conflict of interest." A few murmurs spread through the room. Clarabeth's eyes narrowed. "That's not how agenda items work. It is when it involves financial misconduct," I interrupted. "You authorized payments to Green Crest while failing to disclose your relationship with them on HOA communications. That's a direct violation of both our bylaws and the state's HOA ethics code." The room went dead quiet. "I have the signed conflict disclosure," I continued, "and a copy of the vendor payment logs filed with Elmsworth Residential. You never disclosed your personal interest. You mandated a service, billed residents without approval, and fined people who opted out. That's coercion, Clarabeth." She laughed, but it was brittle. "Zayden, you're not a lawyer." "No," I said, "but I do have one." I held up a letter stamped with the city's legal department seal. "This is a formal notice of investigation from the Municipal Legal Compliance Office. You'll be contacted within 5 business days. And until this is resolved, I'm advising every resident here to withhold any payment related to Green Crest services." Clarabeth tried to speak, but someone from the back shouted, "What about our refunds?" Another voice joined in. "She fined my daughter for planting sunflowers." The room erupted. The other 2 board members looked visibly panicked. One of them, a man named Darrell with a thick mustache and a fondness for peacoats, leaned into the mic. "We will be reviewing the Green Crest contract immediately," he stammered, "and issuing a hold on all related charges." That only made people angrier. Clarabeth tried to regain control, but the meeting spiraled. Homeowners stood up one after another, listing fines, threats, and shady practices. Someone brought up a time she used HOA funds to repaint her mailbox post after claiming it was community enhancement. Another pointed out that Green Crest had skipped their lawn 3 times last month. Eventually, she stormed out. Over the next week, the board held an emergency session without her. They froze all pending fines connected to Green Crest, suspended the contract, and voted to appoint an independent auditor. Within 10 days, residents began receiving refund checks in the mail. I got mine on a rainy Tuesday in a plain white envelope with a stilted apology note. I didn't cash it right away. I made a copy and pinned it to a corkboard in my garage right next to the HOA's original demand notice. That weekend, Ron hosted a cookout to celebrate. Mrs. Delaney brought lemon bars and someone made a lawn sign that read, "This grass was mowed by free will." I brought Priya a bottle of wine and a thank you card. She laughed when she read it. "You know," she said, swirling the glass, "if the board had just followed procedure, this never would have happened." "They counted on no one reading the details," I said. "Well," she grinned, "they picked the wrong reader." And that was the last time anyone tried to force me to mow my lawn someone else's way. 3 weeks after the cookout, things in the neighborhood had settled into a strange quiet. With Claribeth suspended and the board flailing to regain credibility, the HOA operated more like an awkward group chat than a governing body. Darrell, now acting president, was trying to distance himself from the mess, but the damage was already done. I was in my garage fixing the belt on my mower when a Navy SUV pulled up outside. The window rolled down and a clean-cut man in a charcoal blazer leaned out. "Zayden Fletcher?" I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. "Yeah," he stepped out, flipping open a badge. "Detective Milo Hargrave, County Financial Crimes Unit. Mind if we talk?" I motioned to the porch. "Sure, let me grab a chair." He stayed standing. "Actually, this won't take long." "You submitted documentation to the Municipal Legal Compliance Office last month, correct?" "That's right." His eyes scanned me. "Did you know Claribeth Ashburn used a falsified EIN to authorize Green Crest's payments?" I blinked. "Wait, she used a fake tax ID," he nodded. "The number she submitted to Elmsworth Residential doesn't belong to Green Crest. It's registered to a shell company dissolved 6 years ago in Nevada. We believe she's been funneling HOA funds through that entity." I leaned against the porch rail, trying to process it. "So she wasn't just pushing a bad contract, she was laundering money." "At this point, it looks that way. We're still tracing transfers, but your records helped us connect the dots. That security footage of her threatening to fine you. Gold. It gave us probable cause to dig into her financial disclosures." I glanced toward the end of the street, where the Ashburn house sat quiet behind trimmed hedges and shuttered windows. "Is she still here?" "She fled 2 nights ago. Took her husband's car, left her phone. Her accounts are frozen." "We've put out a bolo." I crossed my arms. "So what happens to the HOA?" Hargrave's mouth tightened. "That's where it gets messy. The board technically still functions, but with compromised leadership and no treasurer, they're under state oversight until an audit is complete." I exhaled slowly. "You need anything else from me?" He handed me a card. "If anything new comes up. Otherwise, you've done your part." After he left, I sat on the porch for a long while. The breeze carried the scent of cut grass from somewhere down the block. I glanced sideways and saw Ron's teenage son pushing a mower across their front yard in straight, careful lines. By the following weekend, the neighborhood was buzzing again, but this time with something closer to hope than tension. Word about Claribeth's disappearance had leaked, and while the board tried to play it down, the community had stopped listening. A woman named Patris, who lived near the lake path, started an informal watchdog group. They called themselves the Bylaw Brigade. Not my pick, but it stuck. They met at the elementary school once a week to go over HOA documents, flag inconsistencies, and teach residents how to file grievances effectively. I dropped by one of the meetings out of curiosity and found Mrs. Delaney leading a session on proxy voting rights. Don't let them bully you with fake quorums, she was saying, tapping a whiteboard with a dry erase marker. If they can't meet the minimum, nothing they vote on is enforceable. I clapped quietly from the back. She spotted me and waved me up. Zayden, tell them about the vendor clause loophole. I gave a short rundown of provision buried in Section 5.3 of the bylaws that required all new vendor contracts to be posted publicly for 15 days before board approval. Clarabeth had skipped that step entirely. Afterward, a man I didn't recognize approached me. Stocky, with oil-stained hands and calloused fingers, probably a mechanic. Name's Theo, he said, shaking my hand. I own that auto shop off Route 31. Didn't think anyone could pull one over on the HOA till you did. Wasn't just me, I said, glancing around. Whole block got fed up, he nodded. Still, you kicked it off. That Monday, I got a letter from the county's HOA Oversight Commission. They were appointing a temporary mediator to supervise the board until a full election could be held. Residents would nominate candidates directly and vote by mail. It was a complete overhaul of the existing system, something no one had even thought was possible 6 months ago. I didn't plan on running, but I did agree to help draft a new transparency policy. The board needed rules about communication, finance tracking, and public notice periods. So I met with Patris and 2 other residents in her sunroom, surrounded by binders and legal pads and a half-eaten plate of blueberry muffins. We need a clause about emergency spending, Patris said. And limits on discretionary funds. Also a requirement for third-party audits every fiscal year, I added. We worked late into the evening. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like something was shifting, like the neighborhood was waking up from a long, manipulated sleep. A week later, Detective Hargrave called again. She's been found, he said. Las Vegas. Tried to open a new account under a different name. She's in custody. I didn't say anything at first. She'll be charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion, he continued. Possibly more, depending on what the federal auditors turn up. Was anyone else involved? Hard to say, but so far it looks like she did most of it solo. The board was asleep at the wheel, but not complicit, at least not knowingly. After I hung up, I stood in the garage for a long time, staring at the corkboard where I'd pinned the refund notice. I took it down and replaced it with a photo I'd printed from the cookout, Ron holding a spatula, Mrs. Delaney laughing beside a plate of ribs, and a cardboard sign taped to a cooler that read, "No rulers, just neighbors." Election day rolled around 3 weeks later. The turnout was huge. Lawn signs popped up like spring dandelions, hand-painted slogans, cheerful colors, even a few with glitter. I voted early and spent the rest of the day doing small repairs around the house, a loose gutter, some cracked caulk around a window frame. That evening, the results came in. Patris was elected president. Theo got treasurer. Mrs. Delaney took secretary, mostly because she already knew the bylaws better than anyone. The board was officially in new hands. At the first meeting under the new leadership, they unveiled the full transparency package. Everything would now be published: online budgets, meeting minutes, vendor contracts, even board member attendance. They also passed a motion to dissolve the Green Crest Partnership entirely and make any future service contracts voluntary with opt-in pricing. The room applauded. No one raised objections. After the meeting, Patris caught up to me in the parking lot. "You ever think about running next term?" I laughed. "No thanks, I've had enough HOA politics for a lifetime," she grinned. "We'll see." People remember who stood up when it counted. I watched as she walked off into the evening. The air smelled like grill smoke again. Someone, somewhere, was celebrating. A few days later, I came home to find a folded note on my porch. No name, just a short message. "Thanks for making this a neighborhood again." Inside was a gift card to the local hardware store. I smiled and slid it into my wallet. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the money. It was about something Clarabeth never understood: you can't force people into community. But if you give them a reason to believe in it, they'll build it themselves. And this time, we were building it right. I was tightening the last bolt on the backyard gate when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code said County Courthouse. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered, "Mr. Fletcher, this is Deputy Clerk Hayes. I'm calling to inform you that you've been listed as a witness in an upcoming preliminary hearing involving a former HOA official from your neighborhood, Clarabeth Ashburn," I asked. There was a pause. "Yes, the Financial Crimes Unit submitted a request for your documentation. You'll be receiving a formal subpoena early next week," I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Understood." After we hung up, I stood on the patio for a long time, staring at the spot where Clarabeth had once scolded my dog for stepping too close to her lawn gnomes. The gnomes were gone now. Someone had quietly removed them after she skipped town. A week later, I was in courtroom 11, seated behind the prosecution's table in a narrow row of plastic chairs. The place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. Clarabeth entered flanked by two suited attorneys. Her hair was darker now, almost chestnut, but the posture was the same, rigid, chin tilted just enough to pretend she wasn't surrounded by consequences. They arraigned her on 6 charges: wire fraud, falsifying financial instruments, tax evasion, criminal conspiracy, misappropriation of community funds, and obstruction of a municipal audit. The prosecution submitted over 200 pages of financial records, including the shell company routing numbers and falsified vendor contracts. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. "I was told I owed money for services I never requested," I said, voice steady. "When I refused, I was fined. When I asked for justification, I was ignored. That's when I started looking deeper." Her attorney tried to suggest I had a personal vendetta. "I didn't know her well enough to have one," I replied. "I just didn't like being told I had no choice." The judge nodded. "That's the key issue here, choice." They didn't need a long deliberation. The court scheduled a full trial for the following month and remanded Clarabeth into custody. Her attorneys filed a motion for bail, but it was denied. "Too much flight risk," the judge said. When I walked out of the courtroom, the sun was high and sharp. I didn't feel triumphant, just settled, like a tension I hadn't even known I was carrying had finally drained out of my shoulders. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood kept evolving. The new board held open forums every other Saturday. They invited residents to submit agenda items in advance, and they posted all meeting minutes on a community bulletin site that Petrus's nephew had built for free. The tone of everything had shifted. People waved more. Kids played in front yards without their parents worrying about notices for excessive noise. One morning, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox from a family 3 streets down. They'd almost sold their home after the fines started piling up. Clarabeth had threatened them with lien proceedings over an unauthorized vegetable planter. They'd stayed because of the changes, and now their daughter was organizing a youth garden club. The letter ended with, "Thank you for showing us we weren't crazy." That same week, a landscaping crew rolled into the neighborhood, but this time, not from Green Crest. It was a local startup run by a pair of veterans. They'd been invited by the board to give residents an optional service plan. No contracts, no mandatory fees, just fair pricing and clear communication. I watched as they trimmed hedges outside a corner house, laughing and chatting with the homeowner who leaned on a rake. That house had been one of the first to get cited under Clarabeth's so-called consistency initiative. Now it looked better than it ever had, and no one had been bullied into it. Later that afternoon, Theo stopped by with a clipboard. "We're putting together a proposal to revise the covenant language," he said, flipping through some drafts. "Want to take a look?" The revisions were surgical. Every line that once left room for abuse was tightened. Mandatory services were explicitly banned. Any board decision involving money had to be posted publicly and approved by a 2/3 resident vote. Best of all, there was a new clause. Any board member caught misusing funds would be permanently barred from serving again. You think people will go for this? I asked. They already have, he said. 75% signed the petition. We're just making it official. It passed unanimously at the next meeting. About 2 weeks after that, I sat on my porch with a cold drink and a copy of the local paper. The front page headline read, "Former HOA President Sentenced in Landmark Fraud Case." Clarabeth had accepted a plea deal. 6 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 4. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA in full. The court had already seized several of her accounts and assets, including a second property she'd bought under the shell company's name. I didn't celebrate, but I did allow myself a quiet nod. Ron came by just before sunset with a box of new house numbers, sleek, brushed steel ones he'd ordered for several neighbors. Figured we could finally replace those ugly plastic ones the old board insisted on, he said. Want a hand? We installed them together. As we worked, he looked over and said, "You know, I never thought we'd get past all that." "Neither did I admitted. "But we did," he said. "And the best part, we did it with facts, not shouting." That night the neighborhood felt different, not just quieter but stronger. People had been tested, and instead of folding, they'd stood up. Not with pitchforks, but with documents, with signatures, with truth. The next board election came and went without drama. Patris stayed on as president, and the rest of the board expanded to include younger residents eager to learn. They started a tool share program, a community compost bin, and even a neighborhood book exchange. Nothing big, just things that made people feel like they belonged. I stayed involved, but in the background. I helped draft a few grant applications for community improvements and advised on some legal language when they negotiated a new insurance policy. But mostly, I kept to my yard, my dog, and my tools. One evening, I saw Mrs. Delaney walking slowly down the sidewalk with a canvas tote bag. Inside were envelopes, newsletters, voting reminders, and a few handwritten notes of encouragement. "You're still delivering those by hand?" I asked. She stopped and smiled. "It's good exercise. And people like getting something that's not a bill." I watched her continue down the street, waving to a family on their porch. No one talked about Clarabeth anymore. Her name had become a cautionary tale, not a shadow. The HOA was no longer a threat, it was a tool, finally being used the right way. It took time. It took patience. And it took everyone, but in the end, we didn't just fix a rulebook. We reclaimed our neighborhood, and not one blade of grass had to be cut against